Today's lesson comes from Matthew 5:13 through 18. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. The word of God for us, the people of God. This morning I am going to break one of the cardinal rules of public speaking. I'm going to talk about food in a speech before lunch. This is necessary because we're going to talk about salt. So it's necessary. We're going to be talking about juicy, mouth-watering steaks, baked potatoes with butter and sour cream, pork chops, salted buttery popcorn. This is going to be fun, right? At least it will be for me. I had a big breakfast. I want you to remember that Christians should be expected to suffer, and that self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit. So just mind that as we go through this today. I suppose Tom is going to be listening from somewhere like, what did I just do? Why did I let him preach to them? I want to, as we're talking about, you are the salt of the earth. What does that mean? You are the salt of the earth. We're confronted with a problem right off the bat, because salt today holds a slightly different understanding than it did back when Jesus was talking about it. Our relationship with salt has changed. First of all, if you go to Kroger and you are looking for this, and if you've gone to Kroger trying to find salt, you know this is where it's hiding. It's on the bottom shelf, and it's behind like one of those columns that supports the whole store. Good luck trying to find salt at Kroger. It's bottom shelf sort of material. How much does this salt cost? 49 cents. I challenge you to find anything in all of Kroger cheaper than this thing of salt. 49 cents, bottom shelf. And not only that, our relationship with salt has changed. How many of you are like, it raises my blood pressure, so I need less of it? How many of you, this is something the FDA actually says, our guidelines are 2,300 milligrams. The average American gets 3,400 milligrams of sodium a day, more than 50% of what they need. If any of you are planning on going to Applebee's after this, and you decide, you know what, after he's talked about steaks and everything, I need cheese sticks, and you decide that you are going to get their sampler platter of appetizers, you will get 6,280 milligrams of sodium, which is equivalent to 4 bags of Funyuns. That is 2,250 calories, equal to all your day's calories, and 3 days of sodium. And that's if you don't dip it in ranch. I didn't add up all the sauces. I just went to the sampler platter. So we get plenty of salt. It's not a challenge. So this is not lending itself well to this metaphor. You're the salt of the earth. It raises my blood pressure. I need less of it. It's not a good metaphor, is it? So we have some work to do to redeem this notion of what salt does in our life. Let's think about salt a little differently. Take it out of its modern context. And think of it more about what it meant in Roman times. If you are aware, the word salary actually comes from the Latin word for salt, salus, which is the root of that word salary. You know why? Because in Roman times, Salt was very valuable. In fact, it's thought that Roman soldiers were paid partially in salt as part of their wage because it was that valued of a commodity. Romans spent a lot of time mining and shipping salt to where it needed to go. It was one of the more valuable commodities because it was so very useful. And there are at least three things I want to focus on in salt that we can think about as we're looking for that as a metaphor for our lives today. You are the salt of the earth. What does that mean? Well, first, salt has a great preserving quality to it. Romans, right next to the ocean, right? And if you go and get your daily catch of fish, haul in the fish, how many days do you get to eat that fish before it goes bad? Now, you can try and sell it. You can try and, but you've got a couple days at most, right? It's hot. That fish is getting ready to spoil, and you're in a race against time. Well, what salt does for you, it has preservative properties, right? You can draw the moisture out, get that moisture out of the fish. You've managed to save it, sometimes up to a couple months. So if you're going on a journey, you've got food for the journey. Why? Because salt is available to make that fish preserved. I want you to think, too, about this in terms of what we just went through as a church when we talked about do no harm. The notion of preserving something, we're trying to keep it good, right? So this is starting to redeem the qualities of the metaphor a little bit. You're the salt of the earth. You are the preservative that keeps things from going bad. Second, another quality of salt is the flavoring that it provides. I have a confession to make. I have a bit of a problem when it comes to spices. Amy laughed. It all started one Christmas when Amy and I first moved here. We love Indian food, and you may not have noticed, but Mercer County is in a hotbed of Indian cuisine. So one of the things that Amy got me for Christmas was a set of curry powders. And she got them from this store that, if you ever been to Pittsburgh, they have a spice store downtown on the Strip, in the Strip District. And so she got them shipped from that store. And she didn't know she was starting something with that, but she did. Because now I was like, these are great. And I started ordering more and more spices from this store to the point, it's kind of ridiculous. It's a problem. Like, I have an entire cabinet full of just completely random spices. Anything you can imagine. We have all your classics, thyme, rosemary, oregano, basil. But we have cinnamons. I said it right, cinnamons. There are different types. You may not have known that. They're for different things. We have nutmeg, allspice, ginger, any of those. Tons of spice rubs. The problem with this store is they will send you little sample packets. And it's like, here, you want a spice packet for free? Sure, take this. And here I am. I end up having these spices in my house. I have an entire cabinet. I have one for steaks, one for hamburgers, one for pork chops. In fact, half the fun is figuring out what spice you're going to put on them in order to grill them. But I'm sure many of you love to cook, right? You know, spices are kind of like the palette, the cook's palette. You want to make a beautiful picture, you put the right paint on there to do it. If you want to make delicious food, you've got to have the right spices to do it. This gets at the notion of being the salt of the earth. If you want to make something beautiful with food, how do you do that? You make it flavorful, pungent, delicious. There's all sorts of things you can do with food. Salt is a big part of that. When you're saying you are the salt of the earth, what this means, and especially back in Roman times, is you were making food not just preserved, but delicious. It was something, it's like eating an egg without anything on it versus some salt and pepper on it. It makes all the difference. And this gets at the last quality of salt. It is a condition, a state of being. Now, hold on with me here for just a second. You are salt of the earth. Salt is salty. What good is salt if it's not salty? It's not salt anymore. And you can be like, yes, we got that. But think about this. If you're using a spice of any sort and it's lost its virtue, basil, when it is old, it's worth nothing. It's like putting ground leaves into your food. It does nothing for you. Salt, if it lost its saltiness, it's nothing. And it's no better than the dirt, according to Scripture. Salt is a state of being. Now, don't misunderstand me here. I'm not meaning that it just is it's something that you're born into. No, this is a condition, something you maintain, something you could lose. In other words, it's like an ethic. You are salty or not. And so this leads me to a very important question. How should we act so that we are salty? And I think you have to go to the Scriptures before the salt of the earth Scripture. We didn't read that together, but I'd invite you, pull out the Bible in your pew, if you have it, and turn to Matthew 5. Now, if you're familiar with Matthew 5, you know what I'm getting ready to talk about. But Matthew 5 is the Sermon on the Mount. And you can follow along with me here. Matthew 5 says, "Now when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth.'" What does it mean to be salty? It means you've got to be a peacemaker. It means you are poor in spirit. It means you are merciful and pure in heart. You seek righteousness, and you're persecuted because of that righteousness. You hunger and thirst for what is right and are a peacemaker, pure in heart. And it doesn't matter who you are. We can all do that, right? I want you to think about this. What's your profession? We're a mixed lot of folks, aren't we? We come from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some of us are even from Kentucky. And we come from everywhere. Be a peacemaker. Have mercy. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. Be meek. And no matter who you are or what station of life you're in, that is the salt of the earth. It doesn't matter who we are or where we come from. The unifying factor here is that salt is useful when it is being salty. So, what would life, I want you to imagine, what would life be like without the Beatitudes? What if we had no salt of the earth? Imagine a place without peace, without mercy, without meekness and poverty of spirit, people willing to be meek. What would that world look like? The first thing that popped into my mind was J.R.R. Tolkien, as it often does. He imagined it in Middle Earth, a fantasy world of orcs and goblins, a realm concerned with power and dominion, ownership. And if you've ever watched Lord of the Rings, the darkness that comes with that vision is in many ways what I see in a fantasy world. What is life without the Beatitudes? Securing borders and taking over free lands, where technology and industry are valued more than what is natural, subduing the land and instituting greater power for their owners, looking at one another as means to an end, using people for what they can provide rather than treating people as ends in themselves. And if you are familiar with this story, despite the fact that orcs and goblins aren't real, Tolkien was writing this out of World War II, when there were some very real, dark notions, places where meekness, humility were lacking. Why do I say this? What is the opposite of the Beatitudes? And a minute, what popped into my mind, what I thought of, in addition to Tolkien, was Friedrich Nietzsche. If you're not familiar, his philosophy is a lot of what Nazi Germany was based upon. And it's the idea of the Superman, the man who is all by himself good enough. And one of the most famous phrases Nietzsche uses is this idea of God being dead. And if you'll humor me in reading, I'd like to read this passage for you, because I feel like it gets at the opposite of the Beatitudes. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods, simply to appear worthy of it? He was saying this not as a lament, it was a praise. Shall we not become gods? Of course we should. Because we could, in our seeking power, in our seeking to be strong, powerful, to desire fame and fortune. That's not in the Beatitudes, is it? Nowhere in there does it talk about power. In fact, if you think of it, Christ's greatest temptation from Satan, I show you all the principalities laid out before you. You could have all the power on earth. That's what the greatest temptation given to him by Satan. And he said no. He said no. In a Nietzschean ideology, the problem in this way, that humanity, and humility is the problem, not the solution. And I think we still have that with us today. We look at humility and meekness as errors in judgment. We look for ways to be powerful instead of ways to humble ourselves. We look for ways, instead of finding trust and faith in God to take care of our problems and humbling ourselves before him, instead we look for ways we can take care of it ourselves. Ways we with each other, through our own power and might, can team up together to make things work. That is not the Beatitudes, folks. To be the salt of the earth is not to own. It's not to be in charge. Now, does that mean power is inherently evil? That's not what I'm saying. Anyone can put into practice the Beatitudes. What I'm saying is, and this is very important, the ends are as important, or the means are as important as the ends. Think about that. The way we get to the goal is more important than the goal itself. The Beatitudes, to be salty, are saying, it doesn't work if you're going to lie, cheat, steal your way to a place. That's not what Christ calls us to. It doesn't matter if that worked. The Beatitudes are about the path of getting there. If you accomplish nothing in your life according to Christ, but enacting those things, poor in spirit, meek and humble, you've done what you're supposed to do. I don't care what the goal was. There's nothing in this world that we can achieve that will bring more beauty to it than what these Beatitudes are talking about. The beauty, the flavor of the earth is in our actions that we bring to it. Whether we are a janitor or a judge, whether we are the most powerful person in the country, or the person who's homeless and has no power whatsoever. Our task as the meek, the humble, thirsting for righteousness, is to find ways to bring about Christ's vision. When we find what's good written in literature, we find the Beatitudes, the Jean Valjeans, the Oliver Twists, the Little Women, the Counts of Monte Cristo. The good we find in their meekness, their search for purity in heart, their blessedness in their persecution. When we see beauty online, what do we find there? We find the Beatitudes, the sweet gestures of children, the adorable simplicity of a kitten, the touching gestures of one stranger to another. We see the Beatitudes in the beauty of this world. We see goodness when we see the Beatitudes. You are the salt of the earth. You put these Beatitudes into practice. And as Christians, the Beatitudes are where it's at. I'll be honest, I look around sometimes and get so discouraged. I have, in fact, find faith difficult sometimes, struggle, even thought, what's the point? The thing that does it for me, the thing that makes Christianity worth it, is this chapter right here, because it is so non-human. There's nothing about these Beatitudes that are human in any way, shape, or form. We don't seek any of those things. No one says, I want to be meek. Please make me poor in spirit. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. No, we hunger and thirst for power. We hunger and thirst for image, money. Those are things we hunger and thirst for. Righteousness. Blessed are the peacemakers. I think enough reality television teaches us that a good drama is far better for sales than peace. If we can just poke the bear a little bit, that's a lot better for business than peace. Peace is boring. This is so non-human. It strikes me as something completely false, almost. Except, you know why it's not? Because Christ came down to this earth, the Son of God, had every opportunity to institute anything opposite of this vision. And when you look in Isaiah 53, when you look in Isaiah, what is this Christ that we're looking for? Here's what it is. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised, rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. What does this tell us? The guy who is the guide for us should be this one who says, turn the other cheek. He's the guy that says, I could have had all the power and said no. He's the guy that says, give all your money away and come follow me. He's the guy that threw fits in the middle of the temple. And he's the guy that says, I'm your model. Follow me. That's what Christianity, in my estimation, is about. It has zero to do with power and everything to do with saltiness. Are you the salt of the earth? That's all we're asked to do. Go out and follow God by enacting the Beatitudes and the things of meekness, humility that he requires. Let me ask you, almost all of us have a Facebook account or some social media. Here's a test. If you posted a beatitude as your profile pic, or if on Instagram you posted a beatitude, what if the entire church posted a beatitude? What would you feel about that? What's the first thought that goes into your head? Some of you are like, yes, let's do that. Some of you, would you go, yikes, my feed is not a place for a beatitude? Would some of you be like, I'm uncomfortable being meek in public? How about this? With every post on your feed, could you go take that beatitude that you would post on it and say, this represents what I just put as my profile? It's a public face. It's the place to start, at least. What if everybody in this church, here's my challenge, and I'm going to do this afterwards, put a beatitude up on your feed. Let's start by being the salt of the earth by saying this is what that salt means. You are meek, humble, thirst for righteousness. It's possible. It doesn't matter who we are. And to do that, publicly announce that this is something we're willing to do. Because I think once you start to walk with God in that way, the transformations can be amazing. I think that's the core, in my estimation, of where God lives. That Sermon on the Mount. I think that's where Christianity is. And I'd like to leave you with this. It comes from Micah 6:8. It's one of my favorite passages. But here's what God requires of you. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Amen.